Hello and welcome to the Free Associates. That's right, folks, the Free Associates, the freedom of association, the freedom to associate with anybody or anything that comes our way, because it has the benefit of exposing you to new ideas or new thoughts, however challenging they are. It's fine. It's okay. We can handle those challenges. These are words that we're using. These are our heads we're using. I believe, as in my classroom out here, that we can handle it as long as we're speaking to one another. So we are the Free Associates, and it's the Whale Dog, aka the Whale Dog, Jeremy Whalen, and myself, Norm Cody, the BIQ, the Barbarian in Question, and many guests from our Free Associates bullpen. Today, it's going to be the two of us, and we're going to be looking at individualism, and I'm very interested to see where this is going to land with the Whale Dog. Now, we have, look at that beautiful gold card. I just can't help but show it off. That's our gold Free Associates card. And folks, our Facebook page is The Free Associates, and our website's thefreeassociates.us. And if you're listening to us on WMUA Amherst, well, please know that we're here for you, and we're broadcasting all over this verdant green valley into your ears. And whether you're driving or at home or just need a break and you got your headphones in while you're gardening, go for it. I'll tell you, it's just a beautiful, beautiful sunlight out there right now. Waylon, how you doing, pal?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. You did your first day of synchronous learning with your classes. How was that?
It went well. It went really well, actually. I had a lot of students show up, and couldn't. The only thing that was I couldn't show videos. So I tried to use Zoom to show videos, but I was like, "Look at this! It's gonna be a great visual," and the blah blah blah. And like I muted all the students, and so like halfway through, I got this thing that was like, we can't watch this video. It's going at like 2 frames a second. So I was like, oh, we gotta. So that was one thing I gotta think about. What was that?
Just a connection thing, like level of Ethernet
Yeah,
or whatever?
so it works if you have 1 or 2 people. I've done it, but the bandwidth, just thinking about so many people, it was yeah.
Well, you know, maybe you can bounce them over. You can bounce them over to YouTube. They can watch it there and come back or something like that.
Yeah, and all like press the same button at the same time. We'll figure it out.
Well, not exactly, but you say you have the next 5 minutes to watch this 3-minute video and then you talk about it or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll tell you, Schoology seems to be back online, so that's good. But
I haven't had any problem with it.
I have, and a lot of my students have. But it makes sense. They probably have 10 times the traffic they had a month ago. So they're adapting. They seem to be handling it pretty well. Now, folks, we are here to discuss a Politico series. I like Politico in general. It's an interesting website. It covers politics. And this series we've been doing over the last 6 or 7 days has been looking at predictions, basically. This is how COVID-19 is going to impact America. So we've looked at a little piece about polarization. We've looked yesterday, I tell you, Waylon, that definitely sat with me, that experts piece. I was cranky. I got crankier and crankier on that as the day went on.
Yeah, I don't know. It just, I mean, I think that we're just in such a polarized society now that it's just like people don't want to hear about who the people that are not their experts are, I think, is what it comes down to.
Well, that's right. And you didn't mention that yesterday. You mentioned something else that was really interesting, which is this like blender that is the information society. And so it's hard to know. It's very, very hard to know. But that's true as well. We want to listen to our own experts. I have to say, I always feel so refreshed when someone whose political view I don't necessarily typically agree with, explains something to me. It calms me down. I'm like, okay, all right, this is reasonable. I still may not believe in it. We have a colleague like that at the high school. I'm not going to shout out names, but he often swings by and he challenges me on certain things. And I think, oh, well, that's at least interesting. There is a method here. And I don't necessarily agree with him, but he's not just the devil incarnate. The other half of America is not the devil incarnate. There's different needs.
Well, my thing also, so I have a friend who I often disagree with. He's a from my opinion, is a conspiracy theorist, and just what I just can't get enough of looking at his posts, not because I'm subscribing to what's going on, but because I'm truly trying to understand the connection of the dots and how the psychology behind that works. I'm not going to go into the conspiracy theory, but it's wild, and it's actually fascinating if you really think about it. Just how those connections are.
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, I've had conspiracy theories in my life, and some of which are probably, just because it's conspiracy theory doesn't mean it's not true either. The fact is that Kennedy was probably assassinated by more than one person. That makes it a conspiracy. Like even the Congress kind of understands that. In 1977, they basically acknowledged that something else was going on there. But I agree with you. There is a psychology to it. I would argue that perhaps it's a Roman situation. My son's middle name is Aurelius. He had his birthday 2 days ago. Rocky did. We had a great time. His middle name is Aurelius, and Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor and a Stoic. And the Stoic philosophers were a direct result of the expansiveness of the Roman Empire. They basically were like, this thing has gotten so big and so vast. All I can really focus on is myself and nature around me. Like, I have a role to play in the society. I can't really get anything beyond that. So I'm going to need to bring the focus in. And speaking of bringing focus in, why don't we look at our piece that we're going to tackle today?
Yeah, you want to read that?
Get those graphics up?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, let me read it. Great, thanks so much. And this is titled Less Individualism. So this is, I believe, the 5th or 6th piece in the Politico series. You'll be able to get the link on our Free Associates page. All right, this is called Less Individualism. Eric Kleinberg is a professor of sociology and director of the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University. He's the author most recently of Palaces for the People, How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, Polarization, and the Decline of Civic Life. Okay, it reads, the coronavirus pandemic marks the end of our romance with market society and hyper-individualism. We could turn towards authoritarianism. Imagine President Donald Trump trying to suspend the November election. Consider the prospect of a military crackdown. This dystopian scenario is real, but I believe we will go in the other direction. We're now seeing that market-based models for social organization fail catastrophically as self-seeking behavior from Trump down makes this crisis so much more dangerous than it needed to be. When this ends, we will reorientate our politics and make substantial new investments in public goods, for health especially, and public services. I don't think we will become less communal. Instead, we'll be able to see how our fates are linked. The cheap burger I eat from a restaurant that denies paid sick leave to its cashiers and kitchen staff make me more vulnerable to illness, as does the neighbor who refuses to stay home in a pandemic because our public schools fail to teach him science or critical thinking skills. The economy and the social order it helps support will collapse if the government doesn't guarantee income for the millions of workers who lose their jobs in a major recession or depression. Young adults will fail to launch if government doesn't reduce or cancel their student debt. The coronavirus pandemic is going to cause immense pain and suffering, but it will force us to reconsider who we are, what we value, and in the long run, it could help us rediscover the better visions of ourselves. Okay. All right, so there's a lot there in the 2 short paragraphs. Yeah, sure. Seems to be running the whole field in some ways, in some respects. I have to say, I had trouble getting through that second paragraph a little bit, but Waylon, what's your thoughts on this? You're certainly a proponent of individualism.
Oh, for sure. That's why I just created an American flag in my 1988 Toyota van outside.
That's what you do.
Absolutely. What I think is the takeaway from this is that, at least for me, the hyper individualism and then followed by the authoritarianism lines in that first paragraph are seemingly a kind of contradiction to each other, but I think that it shows how the restraint and discipline that we now find ourselves in this kind of modern America, in which we have this individualism that we are instilled with. We're kind of like the iPod generation over here. We understand that we could both be individuals and we can contribute within our individualism to a larger group, safety and community. Just the idea of both of those things melding together. So people are still going out and doing, I see people right now outside of my house. They're walking and they're doing these things, but we also have the reasonable limitations that have shut down everything. And I mean the impact that we've seen on our economy is unemployment levels that are 10 to 15 times higher than anything we've ever seen in the worst case scenarios. And although there's some people outside walking their dogs, the larger picture is that the precautions that everybody have communally agreed to are being taken into consideration and are are working. And that's because individuals have opted to do so.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So you're seeing in that. Well, okay. That's kind of interesting. Let me just back up for a second. I do think that he's juxtaposing hyper individualism with authoritarianism and saying he's saying, I believe, that individualism is going to end. It could be in an authoritarian direction, right? So he does see that as opposite there. I just want to be clear.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Just that's a good clarification for sure.
Okay. And then also, well, this is an interesting moment, and I have thought about this a little bit. Like, if you go on Facebook, there's all this "stay the f home" and stuff like that. It does feel like, I wanted to come up with a sticker saying, "Don't tell me what to do; it might work better." I do not like to be told necessarily what to do. Perhaps that's my own individualism. Like, I have an allergic reaction to someone telling me what to do. I understand in this situation we want to encourage people not to go out. I thought the sentence in there was really quite crazy. This sentence, I'm sorry, let me just get it. It's about public schools. And basically, as does the neighbor who refuses to stay home in a pandemic because our public schools failed to teach him science or critical thinking skills. I mean,
that's barbed. That is barbed. Them's his fighting words.
It's just absurd. It's just absurd. I feel like this guy's all over the place. This is like a rampage, a little bit. But I hear what you're saying. You're basically positing that individualism is showing itself by individual choice. But couldn't you argue quite the difference right now is that social pressure to stay home and to do certain things is exerting itself on ways in which we are staying home because we feel pressured to, not because we're individually choosing it. Couldn't you argue that?
Yeah, I agree with that, but it's also that pressure is being internalized. So you could go outside right now. You could go and start. You might get harassed a little bit, but you could go start playing basketball if they haven't taken the hoops down. Like, the pressure that you're feeling is also an internalization of you not wanting to contribute to the problem.
But isn't it also peer pressure though? Because I would totally go play tennis right now. Like, I don't think there's any problem. I understand why I shouldn't play tennis because that's a signal that other people can do this over here. As teachers, we know this, that sometimes you have to do stupid rules because you see that there's a drift. It drifts into other activities and stuff like that. So if I let you use your cell phone as a calculator, now I can't keep track of. So, but I mean, I would rather I'd rather be playing tennis right now. I mean, I really enjoy speaking with you, but so I do think peer pressure is being exerted, and I think that a level of finger pointing is being exerted. And I'm not saying that's even wrong. Like, perhaps that's what we have to do, but that seems to me an erosion of hyper individualism, as he might call it. I don't know.
I mean, tell me when we haven't seen peer pressure I mean, the magnitude may have increased. I don't think it necessarily has. I think that there's different. I think that it's shifted towards something that we're all in a concerted effort to tackle this problem. But you could look at a lot of different things. You could look at climate change, and you could look at recycling. Recycling is something that Planet Money did an absolutely great episode on how recycling, a lot of that plastic is not actually getting recycled. It's ending up into the ocean because it's getting rejected by China as we send it over to get recycled into other plastic materials. Recycling, for the most part, well, maybe not for the most part, but it's a peer pressure thing. If you are not doing your due diligence in recycling, if you don't have a recycling bin out there, that's a form of peer pressure. So I think that we just have those peer pressure instilled into our society. We've just shifted that into a concerted effort and focused effort on this looming threat that's so immediate.
Okay. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And certainly you would have that during wartime or any kind of crisis situation. People are willing to obey a curfew that they would never be willing to obey 6 months before. If you put a curfew on last August, people would be like, I'm not staying home.
Yeah.
What's the reason?
Yeah.
And now people are like, okay, I'm okay. And, we talk about this all the time in history class, that this stuff is really changeable. I was listening to a piece about how democracy always has authoritarianism lurking in the background. That is, it will jettison the Constitution it acts like it would never jettison the Constitution, but if it needs to, it will really fast because of necessity. It's not the Ten Commandments, or it's not like it's a contract. It's a contract between us. But if we're faced with extinction, of course we're not going to be looking at the Second Amendment or First Amendment that closely. We're going to be doing what we need to do. By the way, just kind of quickly, I saw an Army transport the other day moving through Northampton. My guess was that they were heading down to New York. I know a bunch of reservists are being sent down to the city, but it was an interesting visual, right?
Yeah.
This big Army transport. Although one thing I will go ahead, Waylon.
Yeah,
sorry.
I just on that note, we live in such a fascinating time where you think about the smallest things are a huge trigger for thinking about people's individual liberties and freedoms in this country. All of a sudden, there is a proposal to put safety locks on guns, and it's, you're taking away my Second Amendment right type thing. We have seen unprecedented shift into this kind of authoritarian directives that are going on. And it's so fascinating that I have not heard anything about, hey, maybe we should pump the brakes on this, and it's just such an interesting dynamic where you see the fear that has gripped people and the relinquishing of freedoms for the good. And I think that we need to do that. It's just, I've never seen it in practice as such. I've never seen it get to the point where we were like, oh, like, Governor Baker, you need to lock down this state. Like, you're not doing the right thing. We need to stay home. You need to close businesses. Not thinking, like, that is a mandate. Like, one of the things is life, like the life lived in pursuit of happiness. You have that instilled within you. Closing your business is a huge threat to your livelihood. Closing a business, and we didn't blink an eye. We just did all this stuff, and we did it because it's going to ultimately, it's the scientifically proven to be the right course of action. But I haven't heard a lot of people saying, this kind of individualism as a mandate of liberties and freedoms, like I was expecting, actually.
Well, you might see it later, I think. I agree with you. And, having lived through September 11th in New York, it's way more strong right now. I mean, my band had a concert 4 blocks from Ground Zero in October of 2001. I mean, that you could get down there really fast, and it wasn't anything like what we're seeing now. So I agree with you that this is really, but I would argue that we'll have to see as it plays out.
Yeah. I also want to say this too. We got a comment from Angela. There are still so many people that are just not abiding by any of the government's orders. I call them IDGAF. You could probably insert some of the words in there. New order. So I think that, I mean, there is a section of the population, and there's other states that are reacting and responding in different ways. So that's a good call.
Well, and it's interesting to look at, and then nationalism has presented itself as little, like a waffle of different experiments, right? In Brazil, they're not taking it seriously. And over in Germany, they've got really good medical resources. These are all just different experiments running out. I would say that we'll see how it plays out in terms of death. If we have a Great Depression that's like significant, there's death involved in a Great Depression. Like sociologists will study a downturn, and they can attribute mortality rates, and there's all kinds of stuff that goes along with that as well. So I'm not questioning what we're doing. Although, speaking of conspiracy theories, I do have a Facebook friend who thinks this is all a conspiracy, and they live in a very remote location, and it would be very hard to prove to them otherwise. And there is a sense, again, that if I can't see it and feel it and watch it, which you've talked about in the last couple of days,
sure.
I don't know if it's real. I have no idea if it's real. Now, let's just go back kind of quickly to this. Here's a problem I have with this piece, and I've had it with almost every piece that we've looked at. And I have it in general, and perhaps it's because as like a high school history teacher, I'm very much a believer in structuralism and ecology of history, that real change happens ecologically. It has to happen on such a fundamental level. It doesn't happen by goodwill. I just don't believe I believe people are good. I really believe people are good. I don't think groups work. Sometimes they work for the better. Recycling is an example, and peer pressure can exert itself. But we've talked about this many times on shows earlier this year, that if it's easier to get it on Amazon, that's probably what people are going to do, especially because they're so busy and a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. So in this piece, I see this like, consciousness and awareness kind of arising that I feel like actually I'm more interested in what are the real tectonic shifts that COVID's going to bring, not just like feel good shifts. Are you seeing that at all in this piece? Because I feel like the second paragraph is saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that where it comes down to, I guess, where I think that all this is going to head when it comes to individualism, I think that what you're going to have is, you're actually going to have a blooming of individualism after this, because people are going to think that they're behind and they need to get ahead. And by getting ahead, you need to separate yourself from the rest. And to whatever extent you're doing that, I think that people are going to have that idea of, I need to make up for lost time. I also think that there is an element of, well, now more than ever, I'm showing that I'm part of this community that is the United States. I'm just using the United States as an example. I'm a part of this community. How can the government and all of its people, all of us people, come together to kind of shoulder the burden of what's going on? So if $2 trillion, the $2 trillion stimulus, that's about 5 to 6 weeks worth of just the economy going as if it were in full health. So we're basically we're lagging behind in 5 to 6 weeks of productivity. So how are we going to make that up? So it needs to be on this end. It needs to be, how can everybody how can everybody think about themselves as individuals and get ahead in a true capitalist way? And on this side, how can the social securities that we have in place cater to the idea that we need to meet in the middle?
Okay, that's possible, and I hear what you're saying about the 5 to 6 weeks. I think that's what it's designed to do. I don't think there's illusions about that. I mean, it is a stopgap measure. It's a really expensive stopgap measure, but it's a stopgap measure. And I like what you're saying. One way that that Robin and I have been speaking about is, I think after this, we're going to be feel more free to say no to things, no to travel, no to like certain kind of things that we just don't really work for us anyway, which is going to keep us more local, etc. So I think that's, I think a lot of ways, when you go through this, you do kind of reprioritize. Like, what am I doing here? What do I want my family's experience to be? I mean, I do want to at some point come back in future episodes and talk about, like, I don't particularly relate to this, like, make America this or anything on left or right. I just don't relate to, I like Americans. I like them as people, but that's not how I see my grouping. I see my family as my priority and a small group of people around my family. I don't relate to like big mission statements. I don't relate to like, we're all in this together. It must be biological, because I'm just like, I don't know you. I'm not sure we are in this together.
Well, that's a good point. So Todd actually just commented, I'm a driver and still considered essential. It's amazing how many out-of-state non-commercial vehicles are still out there on the road. And this actually plays into an idea a conversation that I was having with my mother about Rhode Island going door to door and trying to find New Yorkers. So as much as we think we're in the United States,
really? I didn't hear about that.
You didn't hear that? Swear to God, go look it up. Because what was happening was that New Yorkers were going for reprieve into Rhode Island, and by doing so, they were jeopardizing Rhode Islanders' safety and health. And if that is not so backwards of where we are as a society and a country, I don't know what is, because that was just immediately huge. It was a huge shock to me that I reading that article, because one, that's just, we think about the liberties and freedoms that we have, but two, the idea that when crap hits the fan and the tribalism gets to such that we're thinking of alienating and isolating certain populations that are an hour away from us because of some arbitrary border of state, Like that's where, if all of a sudden society starts crumbling, I think that's where we're going to have some internal strife for our country.
Waylon, I'm gonna have to fact check that at some point.
Yeah.
What would they do if they found a New Yorker in a house? What would they say?
I'm gonna look it up right now.
No, well, don't get too stuck on that. Because
Yeah, go ahead.
But tell me, what were they gonna do? What would they do to New Yorkers?
They were going to send them back home.
How? In a cop car?
CNN.com. Rhode Island will knock on doors and stop cars to find New Yorkers to slow the spread of coronavirus.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Would they do an accent check or something? Like, talk a little. I don't have to talk to yous. It's none of your business. I think that it's probably people going to their vacation homes is part of it. And, that has been a source of tension in a lot of communities, is that rich people are leaving the cities and going to their vacation homes. And Todd was mentioning that out-of-state license plates. I see a lot of Washington State, California, New York plates. But I think that these are children of families coming home and like staying with their parents. I mean, that's my guess. Yeah. Is that they're seeking refuge.
And to what extent that they're actually what they instilled this with. This was March 28th, so this was last week. And to what degree they were actually doing this. I was actually, my brother picked something up in Rhode Island after 2 days after I read this So I don't know to what extent, but the idea that the governor made this decree is pretty intense.
It's Rogue Island down there. It's Rogue Island. By the way, great podcast, Crime Town Season 1 is about Buddy Cianci and like the Providence Mob. It's one of the most entertaining podcasts you're ever going to see. Well, Waylon, can you cue that music back up, pal? We're going to lead out.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
Folks, you've been listening to the Free Associates. By the way, Waylon's impressed by my stage freeze on the video. So I'm going to stage
super good. Super good.
Check this out. Check this out. Like imagine... and then I'm back, but I wasn't frozen.
That's amazing.
I wasn't frozen. Well, I don't... Yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. Listen, you guys have been listening to Free Associates. That's right, the Free Associates. We freely associate, and we're free to associate with you, and you're free to associate with us, and you're free to like us on our Free Associates page or check out our website. If you've been listening on WMUA-Amherst, we'd love to be with you. We've been keeping this strong. Thanks to Dan Ferrara, who's just like one of the joys of life. And I want to give a shout out to Taylor Cassidy, who is the exiting programming director of WMUA-Amherst. She's such an excellent,
awesome
person. I mean, really, one of the finest people I've dealt with in years. Just professional and says yes. She doesn't say no. She doesn't figure out why she can tell you that she can't do that for you. She says, we'll work it out. And that's the kind of attitude I really appreciate. Waylon, anything you want to say before we wrap it up today, pal?
I want to say this. Thank you to Todd and the Courier and his nephew Caden. They helped me out with the van today. So cool. So helping people. So that was really cool. How about yourself?
People helping people so they can have funky vans with beds in the back. I love it. Hey, you know what? I'm just going to enjoy my family a little bit more. I got my first synchronous learning class tomorrow. So if you're in my US 2 block, wake up in the morning and try to get dressed and get your breakfast on, because we're going to study the Great Depression, and it couldn't be more relevant. So thanks so much, guys. We've been the Free Associates, and we will see you soon. Stage freeze now.
Woo!